Craft Spirits has been on fire lately. Can they keep up the trend with batch 34? Let's dive in to find out. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Hutch, and thanks so much for joining me on this journey through the world of whiskey. So that's right, today we're diving into Barrell Bourbon Batch 34. So I've never actually had a batch of just barrel bourbon. I have had the Seagrass Rye from 2021, which I thought was a very unique and very tasty release. I have had the release from 2022, Barrell Vantage, which I also thought was great, and you saw on a lot of like top 10 lists from all of 2022, well regarded. Batches 32 and 33 from Barrell have also gotten great reviews, so in terms of just their bourbon releases, it seems like they're doing phenomenal things, and I'm very excited to dive into this. This sample was actually sent to me by Barrell Craft Spirits themselves, very generous of them. Looking forward to diving in for that fact. And this is actually the first time I've received something from a distillery to review, so I don't know, maybe that's a sign that the Bourbon Hutch has kind of made it. Anyway, I am super excited to dive into this batch. What we have here is, again, batch 34. Age statement here is 6 years, so that's the youngest stuff in here, but I've heard it's 6, 8, 10, and 15-year-old bourbon all mixed in here, which is great. It is 114.62 proof, and on the back it says distilled in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Indiana, so doesn't specify exactly, but probably Dickel and some MGP, and I'm not exactly sure what Kentucky distillery they might source from. If you know, would be happy to hear from you in the comments what the specific kind of ratios are here if you've got that down. In any case, I've heard great things about this batch, so I am excited to dive in. Again, big shout out to Barrell Craft Spirits for sending this sample. With all that talk, let's dive into the actual whiskey itself on the nose. Wow, that is powerful for a nose. It's rich and dense. One of the first notes I get on this is like butter, and then kind of wrapping around that is a brown sugar note. So if you think about like you're making a batch of cookies and you start with that like butter and sugar base, like it smells a lot like that. But mixed in there is like a peach note, maybe even an apricot kind of note, which the Seagrass Rye is finished in an apricot brandy barrel, I believe, and there's almost a hint of that, just like an apricot sweet fruit note. There's also kind of like an earthy groundedness to it, probably coming from some of that older whiskey, some oak. There's a orange peel and orange zest quality, citrus quality here as well. Maybe that's the Dickel. I know people get that kind of citrus, maybe even like Flintstone vitamin note, just peeking through here. But it's really nicely folded in with that brown sugar and butter. A little bit of a sweet corn. And then like a dense cherry note as well. Wow, that has got a lot going on. There's fruit notes, there's sweet sugary notes, there's oaky notes. It's kind of a mix of things, but the overall impression is sweet and very dense and jumping out of the glass because of that. All right, good start. Let's go in on the palate. This will be my first taste, everybody. Cheers. Well, that's pretty good. I got more of like a honey and brown sugar start to it, so nice and sweet and sugary. Honey came forward, wasn't as much on the nose, but more on the palate. Really interesting there. The mid palate got more of that baking spice, some cinnamon, maybe even just like white pepper and black pepper, some kind of peppery note. And then maybe a little bit of like a nutmeg or something along those lines with just a touch of sweet spice. Back end, I will say I think the flavors faded a little bit there for me first sip, so we're gonna have to get palate acclimated, but it got sweetened up and a little bit of that oak stayed around. So great first sip, really nice brown sugar present as well, kind of throughout the whole sip. So let's go in for a second sip, palate's acclimated, let's get more on the palate. Cheers. Okay, so on that sip, Three flavors really came to the front for me. We got that orange citrus zestiness. The cherry that I got on the nose came through more on that sip, and a little bit more of a layer of vanilla, maybe just vanilla and caramel coming through. So that one went a little sweeter and fruitier on the sip. I do think that the back end is spicier and maybe a touch of that oak comes through, but we're gonna pay more attention to that on this third sip and really dive in and evaluate it overall for you. Let's revisit the nose real quick. Yeah, that nose is so nice. That orange, oak, apricot, brown sugar, brown butter kind of note. Really nice. All right, third sip here on the palate. Evaluate the finish. Cheers. All right, that's pretty nice. Let me walk you through the whole progression there. So it starts out more robust for me on the palate. It's got this like nice brown sugar, orange citrus, honey quality to start. Great. Kind of fades into this cherry and spice in the mid palate, so that baking spice blooms up with some cinnamon heat, and a little touch of that like apricot comes along with that. Really interesting in the middle. And then the back end, I do think it thins out a little bit, the flavors. I get more of like a shortbread and some of that cherry sticking around with a touch of oak. I feel like the finish is very easy. Like the whole sip is actually pretty easy for 114 proof, but it tames down and it gets pretty mellow on the finish for me with flavors that are a little bit harder to pick out. I feel like the nose is fantastic, and the front palate and the mid palate are spectacular, and the finish is a little bit shorter. It's not super short, it's more in that medium to slightly medium long category. You can really track that like shortbread and cherry note, but it does invite you in for another sip, and I think overall it's a really solid batch. All right, everybody, final thoughts here on Barrell Batch 34. It's a really, really complex and dense whiskey are the words that come to mind. Complexity and density. It's got depth of flavor, especially on the nose. The nose is really, really awesome and super inviting, and you could sit there and smell that all day long. Yeah, just so nice. The front palate and the mid palate really come forward with those like sweet notes with some citrus and spice in the mid palate, and the finish is pretty easy with that like shortbread, touch of oak, and a little bit of cherry. I do think overall I might want a slightly longer finish if I had to nitpick, but overall it is a really, really good batch, and I believe MSRP on these is 80 to 90 bucks. So Barrell is a little bit more on the expensive side, but hey, they're blending 10 and 15-year-old whiskey in here, and whenever they do something, they're definitely trying to add value with their finishes, and I respect pretty much everything I've had from them has been really, really solid. All right, let me know in the comments below, what have you guys thought of Barrell Batch 34 if you've tasted it already, or if you haven't tasted it, does it sound like a batch you're gonna wanna go out and try to get? Until I see you guys again for another video, all I can say is keep drinking good whiskey and cheers.